Hello, everybody. Hello, Gravitrons. I'm MoreGravity. Let's study some chess. All right, so I played a game here. You can see maybe um, the combatants. Me, I had white, MoreGravity, and my opponent was named Psychic. What a cool name to get a hold of. And now we're going to go to here and reframe the chess match. And this was a pretty cool game. Somewhat straightforward in some of the calculations, but not in a bad way. E4, E5, and with F4 we have, of course, the King's Gambit. D5 is, I think, called the Black Deer Gambit. I could be wrong about that. Well, at any rate, Black is playing largely to confuse things and maybe for a wild and tactical fight. I captured on D5, which I think is fine. And my opponent recaptured with his queen. And I'm faced with this position. This was my first real think of the game. I decided to bring out my knight to F3. I have 3 points of pressure against the E5 pawn, while black has 2 pieces defending, a major piece in the queen and a minor piece in the knight. So black should look for either something extremely devastating against some other part of my encampment, or maybe add a defender to this mix. Somehow address the fact that I'm overpowering him, her, or they on E5. Bishop G4, nifty with the pin against knight F3, but white doesn't care and plays well with knight takes E5. Pawn takes E5. When the bishop captures on F3, of course recapturing with the F pawn to maintain a strong presence, or as strong as we can, really, here in the center. Thinking that these queens are going to come off early. Maybe not right away, but when you see queens in opposition like this in front of their kings, it's usually pretty darn difficult to keep them through to the end game. One side or the other side is gonna have reason to trade queens. I gotta be straightforward with you, Gravitrons and viewers. I'm not liking this setup, so we're gonna head over to this one, and of course gonna bring you clued into the broadcast by making sure all the squares are visible and so on. So if you'll bear with me a moment, we'll be reviewing the rest of the game from chess.com. Where were we? Probably at black had just castled queenside on move 8. Knight c3. And these queens are going to oppose each other in front of the kings for a moment, but now that even that they're not, it's likely that they'll trade as to any other kind of departure or even survival through to the end game. For that, I decided to play bishop h3, kind of shakes things up, but also there's no real good response for black other than knight to b8. And now doesn't this bishop have many more fine squares in its purview or in its attack than when it was back on f1, where it only had 2 squares. It only had 2 or 3 of those types of squares. It depends if you count the defending square, if the bishop's defense of the queen on e2 counts as a square or not. So this bishop is just now more influential on the game. Oftentimes, with bishops to um, the edges, bishops developing to the edges, very often you want to see the pawn, whatever pawn it is, in this case h2, advance. And then the bishop is covered by the rook very often. It's also nestled in here behind the pawn so as to shield from some attacks. And the rook is doing more duty with the extra squares, and the pawn is out there in the front lines where he belongs as a not so valuable but sometimes fierce warrior. But I chose instead bishop h3 check right away. I didn't think I had enough time to play h4. Let's see if that's the case. Actually, less than how many lines we're looking at. We don't need 10 seconds, we need 5. And let's look at this. So bishop h3, one of the better moves here for white. The king moves to b8. This is a type of move. The king makes this move to b8, right? This is the type of move an experienced player makes. There's no clear reason why to explain that that's definitely better than certain other moves. Well, maybe rook d7 surrenders the exchange, but what's wrong with, say, you might say, what's wrong with pawn to f5? And there's nothing wrong with pawn to f5. It's just a little more dangerous sticking your pawn and sticking your pawn's head out onto the 5th rank like that. And I mean, it's only going to be pinned until the king moves anyway. I'm not exactly sure why or how to explain that king to b8 is just the more natural and best move here. Some of it comes from experience, to be honest. And like I said, rook d7 would be met with bishop takes d7 check, and losing a rook for a bishop is against black's favor. Okay, we went over this page. Then d3. I chose to play d3 here. There are other moves available. Like I said, swapping queens. These queens are going to swap at some point. I played d3 because this bishop has to get into the game. This board is way more clear than cramped. Right? So bishops are going to do better than knights on this kind of board, with more lines, more diagonals open, and so on. So I value my c1 bishop very highly. And quite simply, the pawn at d2 will not move to d4, as there are so many different pieces that black can use to capture that pawn and go ahead in material. I mean, even knight takes c6 looks particularly good, grabbing the extra pawn. The queen on e2 is under attack. Although actually, no, that upon knight to d4, then white captures on e5 and it's all over. So scratch that, but I don't like pawn to d4 here. Say maybe that the rook would capture, or the queen. The knight must stay where he is, or the black queen becomes en prise. Free for the taking, en prise. So I played d3. It's a little bit like a little slow, maybe a little bit cautious. I felt it stabilized things. Let's see what happens. My opponent takes off the queens. I captured back with the king. That's fine. This is strange. Some games there's this wild line of attack here, and this piece is making movements that aren't even legal by any piece available in the world of chess. And this rook just turned into a mushroom from Super Mario Brothers. But in this game, no, that's not. There's nothing like that. I mean, there's in this game how it is. Things are rather quiet on the home front. Some would say this is a boring game. To me, what it gets to this extent, look at how nestled at home. all the pieces on both sides are just about fine right where they are. Um, there's nothing crazy going on. So how do you? So this kind of beautiful in that way, just stoic and calm. So, for instance, how would White want to? Well, let's go back a move. How would Black want to proceed here? This calls for an idea known as probing for weakness. So sometimes there really isn't much in the position itself. But Black does, I think, the right move. Rook to e8 check. It's probing for weakness. It's trying to jostle the king around, make yours truly respond with the correct move, which I think I did with king d1. Probing for weakness. So the king goes back to d1, just responding, simple threat, simple response. Knight to d4. I love this by my opponent here. But he finds the one piece. Is that probably the one and only piece, maybe with this rook and this and this bishop? Well, actually a few because of this rook. But anyway, there aren't that many pieces on the board that Black can just attack as they are as loose pieces. And sometimes this doesn't win the computer's award for best game of the year or anything like that. But you force my opponent psychic is forcing White, is forcing MoreGravity to play accurate moves. This is a type of pressure. This isn't pressure like we're gonna just all overload on the G7 square. It's not that type of pressure, but it's like well named. It's like a type of psychic pressure. You continue to pose threats to your opponent in otherwise boring or quiet positions, and your opponent might at some point crack against that kind of mental or psychic pressure. So f4, simply escaping the attack into a square where White's dark square bishop is naturally defending. Bishop c4, I agree, is a type of an inaccuracy. I don't know if it was right away or at this point. Yeah, immediately after I made the move knight to e4, or was it before? I'm not certain. I noticed that these two pieces are vulnerable to an attack that sometimes will be overlooked. This simple pawn to c3 pawn fork against b4 and d4. And this was the main turning point of the game. Knight to e7 allows the fork on c3. And that's pretty much it, my friends. I mean, sometimes you have these games that get crazy, and this is the thing to do, and that's the thing to do. Other times, either you or your opponent gets their minor pieces forked, and that's it. But consolidating victory from here. I did an excellent job of consolidating victory. King to e2 was fine, and I'm pretty much going to trade pieces. You're in check from a knight. The most natural thing to do is look for an opposite colored square that your knight can't attack. No, that's not right. Sometimes that's right. Look for like this. This is what I'm trying to say. With a knight diagonal to the king. So, sometimes an opposite colored or same colored square that's what it is. The same colored square that the opponent's knight can't easily attack or isn't attacking. I'm not sure about that. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm not sure. I know that when, like I said before, that this constellation is difficult for the knight. Other than that, come up with your own ideas I remember them. But when the knights are like forming a tic tac toe, then that's a big deal because you've placed your king in a space where he can't easily be, attacked by the opponent's knight. It takes 3 moves, all 3 in a row by a knight, to even get the white king in check. More. Just a few more moves here. Oh, no, 3 more moves. So king d2. I don't know. I thought it was the move. There's knight f3, and I think that's how he played. But then king goes back to the better square e3, still challenging the invading knight so as to garner as much initiative as he can. And knight to d4 doesn't pose any immediate threats to white. Rook c1. Rook c1 is just like I said, psychic pressure, immediate pressure on c7. We would see most likely rook c8 here, except then the bishop on h3 wins the exchange. So that's off, meaning that I'm pretty sure white can gather another pawn out of all this. Or at least force some trades. Knight f5, and that's a full piece. So that's game. All right, like I said, this game was not a crazy game that everything was wild and all that. It was actually kind of impressive in the other direction. It's more like this right here after white's 12th move, just subtle. So what you do is probe for weakness, attack your opponent, try to hit some loose pieces, see if he jostles something free. Maybe he or they might attack you in response, and maybe that will jostle something free for you, or vice versa. This pawn fork seemed to be this pawn fork on c3 really won the day for white. That's all. Thank you so much for watching. I'm MoreGravity. Have a great night.